Tech capital is about technology that enables new things that can be seen as a competitive edge or that helps people in the company.
Hi Aviv, it's a real pleasure to have you here at the CTO Show. I know you are a global advisor and coach tech executives, but I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you for having me here. I'm Aviv Ben-Yosef. I'm located in Israel. I've been coding since I was 9, I think. And after working in several companies, startups, and freelancing for a few years, I've slowly moved and transitioned to helping CTOs, VPs of engineering, to help create world-class engineering teams. That's my passion. That's what I'm really interested in making a dent in the world by creating that. And as part of that, I've been working the past few years with companies globally and have just released my first book, The Tech Executive Operating System, which is exactly about this.
Great. Today I wanted to speak with you about some bunch of themes, in particular about producing tech capital rather than obsessing about tech debt and to drive value, and also shift the R&D from a cost center to an innovation center that's not just a Jira resolving machine. And finally, about the axioms of tech leadership for forming a personal operating system, just like the title of your book. So, first thing, what's tech capital for you?
Yeah, so I'm guessing we all know what's tech debt, right? And I always say that if you had a friend that's always obsessed about tech debt and saving every penny and every cent, you would probably go to that friend and help them realize that even if you no longer drink cappuccinos outside and save the cost of a cappuccino every day, at the end of the year, you've only just saved, you know, debt that's equal to the amount of 365 times the cost of a cappuccino. But tech capital, just like real capital, is about the ability to create more and more value. So rather than focus on minimizing how much coffee I'm going to drink, which I don't think is a good idea in general, I can focus on how can I create more value and therefore have more assets for me. So when it comes to tech capital, first of all, you have to realize that it's not another feature because features are like, you buy a car and the second you get the car and you start driving it, it starts lowering in value and you always have to maintain it. And that's the same for features. Tech capital is about technology that enables new things that can be seen as a competitive edge or that helps people in the company. For example, um, I've seen in a lot of companies where every marketing email or transactional email that's being sent has to involve some engineering work, right? Someone in marketing, someone in product wants to change the copy in an email and they have to open a Jira ticket. It has to be on the roadmap. Someone does it as part of the sprint. And some companies say, all right, let's make this an example of tech capital. Let's make a tool that enables people in marketing, people in product to be more autonomous. And you create, for example, a CMS-like solution that means that for 80% of changes, no one needs to talk to engineering. They can just do what they feel like. And that's like a new power for people in marketing rather than having to depend on scheduling stuff in the sprint and waiting for it to happen. They can just, I have an idea, I try it out, I learn, and whatever I see works, I can let it continue. And if I don't like it, I can just revert and try something else. And that's an enabler. That's what I call a force multiplier. And capital is like that. How can we create things that just make the company as a whole better?
Well, I really like your perspective about technical debt, and in particular, what's organizational debt and organizational smells?
Yeah, so we all know and care for code, and it's easy to spot code smells because we've become accustomed to it. And if you do what I do, which is work with dozens of companies globally, you start picking up patterns when you look at an org chart or you see people talking and you realize that there might be issues in the organization. And as teams grow, as we become bigger, as the personnel changes because we created a new team, people came on, people left, we might have forgotten to refactor the organization, to change it a bit, to be at the optimal situation. So organizational smells are things that I can sense when I'm looking at an organization, and then know that there's org debt, that we need to change things up, maybe change the structure, maybe change the processes, stuff like that. And if you want, I can give you a couple examples of org smells.
Yes,
Uh,
so how should we measure in particular R&D organizations?
So first of all, I always say that we all know to how to spot premature optimization, right? Someone is rushing to make the best absolute code possible before we even know that we're gonna need that, or we know that it's gonna be needed at scale, etc. And premature organization is the same for teams, where you look at a team and you see that there are a bunch of very, very small teams, and we created prematurely a bunch of team leaders and gave up titles like tech leads that ended up splitting the company and splitting the roles in the organization too soon. So, for example, premature organization would be having four teams of three people rather than having everyone be in one team or two. Or another example would be having from day one a back-end tech lead and a front-end tech lead, so that you can no longer bring in someone new that will have any part of the responsibility because everything has been divided up, stuff like that.
Great. Why is tech strategy a bad thing?
um, I don't know how often you hear people talk about tech strategy. I've been noticing it coming up more and more lately. And I don't have anything bad to say about the concept of wanting to create a strategy. That's always good, right? Rather than focusing on the short term, thinking about the long term is always good. But once you pigeonhole yourself, so you only look at the tech part, your strategy is only for what you're doing, then you're starting a bit too late. You're working in almost of a waterfall mode, because rather than being at the table with the CEO, with the other executives, where the real strategy is being decided, you wait to be giving the actual strategy and only then start working on your own strategy. And I think that if we as CTOs want to enable our team to have the biggest impact, and if we want to create an organization that is actually and truly world class, we have to do what I call move upstream, be right there where the real decisions are being made, and then take part in forming that real strategy. And from it, everything else should come. You shouldn't start from only focusing on your tech strategy.
Can you please elaborate more about moving upstream? That's an interesting concept. I'd really like to know.
Yeah. Many people who are tech executives are really good at the tech part, right? We understand code and we understand what our team should be doing. We're not really good at the executive part, taking the leadership and taking the initiative and having all the impact that we have. And if you ever watched Spider-Man as a kid, you probably heard the saying, with great power comes great responsibility. And I'm saying that if you're a CTO, you should say that with great responsibility should come great power. You are in charge of all of these people. You're on the hook if we miss a deadline or if the roadmap isn't being met. You should also get the power to decide or be part of the decision about what the team is going to be doing, how should the company be moving forward, and that sort of stuff. So you should elbow your way to the decision table where people are deciding about the roadmap, the company strategy, and being part of that, being a real executive in the company, not just, the highest paid geek in the company.
Well, I really like your analogy about Spider-Man. And at this point, what are the most common mistakes you see first-timers, CTOs make all the time?
Yeah, I would say that premature organization that I mentioned is one of them, because people just rush to try and give titles to stuff. Sometimes we try and treat our organization like we treat code. We want to have good naming for everything. We want to make everything tidy and nice. But with people, it's not like software. We have to wait a bit more. We have to let things settle. We have to see how things are going. Another example would be focusing so much on the roadmap, on delivering it, that we don't look long term and we don't see what should be coming ahead and start planning. I know that it's very, very easy. It's the path of least resistance to go into execution mode and focus on things like the architecture and the coding standards and stuff like that. But as real leaders, we have to be the ones who are looking forward and thinking, should the team be bigger by, let's say, 2 quarters ahead? Because if so, you should start hiring those people right now and plan for things like where the company might be expanding in the market, for example, and starting to build the product in a way that would match that sort of stuff. Um, and lastly, I would think that a very, very typical first timer mistake is looking at your team as it is right now and thinking that everyone thinks and understands things like you do. So, for example, when you're a CTO, you have a deadline and you know in your head, you know when a deadline is, a real deadline. If we miss it, something really bad is going to happen. And when it's something that the company has decided about a date, but if we miss it by a week or two, nothing bad is going to happen. And I see people all the time not communicating that to their people. And therefore, the engineers under them, they tend to treat every deadline as a true deadline. They never want to miss it. And then that means that we get this cascading effect where if you tell me, Aviv, you have to get this feature done by May 1st, I'm going to add all the buffers to make sure that I'm going to get to it on May 1st. I'm going to cut all of the features that I don't have to do. So by May 1st, 100% it's done. And if the company could have lived with pushing the deadline by a week or two, we might have created a better feature as a whole because I would have known that I have more space here. So we have to understand that we need to translate things so our people understand what we have in our minds and what context we hold.
Well, talking about delivering features and so on, how to make innovation a regular part of the work is opposed focusing solely on the roadmap.
Yeah, I would say that you have to create the space for it to happen. And that's hard if you treat your team solely as a team that needs to deliver on the roadmap, because that's like, if I ask a CTO and I ask them, how do you measure your team at the end of the year? How would you say we did good or we didn't do good? And most of the time, what I hear is something like, if we delivered what we had on the roadmap, then I'm happy. And I say that that's just meeting expectations, right? It's nothing special. You're just doing what you're getting paid to do, and it's very trivial. You become what you said at the beginning, a Jira resolving machine. And real R&D, real engineering organizations that have a bunch of value and impact on the company should create innovation all the time, such as tech capital, like I talked about. And the thing about tech capital is often no one in the company is going to come up to your team and say, hey, can you create this tool? Because many times other people in the organization can't even imagine what's possible when it comes to code, what the team can do for them. So you need to create the
Well,
time for innovation, right? Um, I have an example that I really like where one company I work with, an engineer was just looking at how the sales team was doing stuff, how they were creating their pipeline. And that's a company that was selling based on geographical location. And they used all sorts of ways to try and create their pipeline and decide where the salespeople are going to go next. And the engineer just looked at it and thought and said, I think I could get some open data that's related to those specific geographies. And he took 2 days, created some data science map tool. You can see a map that shows you clustering of what's changing in the geographies the company was aiming for. And all of a sudden, everyone in sales were like, the mind exploding thing. They're like, oh my God, we you just saved us months of time by showing us this data. That's tech capital. That's innovation. And no one asked the engineer to do that. It wasn't on the roadmap. No one planned for it. But the engineer had the ability to take 2 3 days and try it. And it might have failed, right? He might have created something and then sales would say, no, no, it's useless. But if he didn't have the time, you would never get this kind of amazing experiment that actually works. So you need to create the time for it. I try and push companies to do what I call intermissions. Your listeners might have heard about a similar concept of sabbaticals, like at Basecamp, the company that made Basecamp and Ruby on Rails, where every few weeks, four, five, six, seven, eight, I don't really care about the number, you give your engineers a week or 3, 4 days to work on their own innovation. And it's not just a hackathon, right, that you do once a year, but something that happens like twice a quarter at least. And then they can innovate regularly. They can try stuff. They can experiment, and that's how you create that sort of special magical feeling where people actually have autonomy for their own time part of the time in the year, and they can try things and test things and create this magical tech capital stuff.
Well, regarding engineers, I know that you say that companies need to have less senior and principal engineers. Why do you say that?
Yeah, well, I'm not against hiring talented people, of course. What I am saying is let's think about what your people would do if you would give them more time to decide about things. For example, we always have great ideas in the shower, right? But most engineers, the kind of ideas they have in the shower are about code. Oh, maybe I should use that new Node.js package. Or maybe I should use that new SaaS I read about. And I want people who understand that the real impact is how can we make the product better? How can we make processes better? People who obsess not just about the tech part, but also about the product part. So when you're creating your organization, when you're hiring people, when you're promoting people, I want you to, as a CTO, to not just focus on let's promote the most technically skilled people, but let's also interview and coach and help people when it comes to understanding the actual product and gaining what I call broad shoulders, people that you can give them a task and they can do it from A to Z, and you can trust them that if there's anything wrong, they're gonna ask a question or raise a flag. And when product comes up with requirements, a product engineer wouldn't just say, all right, take note and start implementing. A product engineer would listen, have their own insights, and say, I think that X and Y aren't that important. And if you agree, we can put them aside and save like 3 weeks of development. What do you think? That kind of discussion is what I want to see in my engineers. And that's only possible if they also have the perspective of looking at the product and not just at the tech part.
Well, since you are speaking about hiring talent, I also wanted to know if you have any good tricks to retain them. That's a particular critical theme this time.
For retaining your engineers over time, I would say that you, first of all, need to create career ladders that are very, very clear so that people have something to strive for and see for themselves that they actually progress, become better, and I know it's hard to admit it for some companies, but eventually people care about what they have in the resume, what they can show on LinkedIn after they've been with the company for a few years. So having the ability to show that I've progressed through the ranks, I was an engineer, senior engineer, staff engineer, that really helps people see that they have a vision and a horizon to look for and to move forward in the company. And also, I believe about creating space and autonomy for the best people to try things and experiment and learn on their own. So I'm guessing you've heard about the Spotify model where people work in squads that are cross-functional and they get their own objectives and they work on that. And I think that that's a big part of creating the self-actualization for people. If you know the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, this pyramid where we have the basic stuff that we want to get done, and right at the top he put self-actualization. I'm making the most of my potential. I'm actually investing my brain and I'm thinking and creating and I have autonomy, and that's something that you get only when you provide your team with enough space. So don't be a micromanager, Don't assume that they need too much guidance, and let them do their own stuff. For example, in the intermissions I talked about. And I see how companies that have this kind of space end up retaining people for longer. I would say the average I'm seeing across the industry is around, let's say, a year and a half to 2.5 years. And companies with a lot of agency, with a lot of autonomy, tend to get it to, I would say, more closer to 3, 4 years as an average, which is amazing.
Well, at this point, I usually recommend, ask the guest to recommend a book, a resource, YouTube channel, and so on. But since you are a book writer by yourself, I just wanted to know about your book. So please let me know.
Yeah, sure. So it's my first book. It's been out since early April, and I actually wrote it between the COVID lockdowns in Israel. And the reason I wrote it is because I kept noticing that in my work with clients, I keep repeating the same principles. And that made me realize that, hey, instead of me trying to reach everyone as clients and repeating stuff, I really, really want to see the impact on the industry as a whole. And that's why I decided to write the book. And it's called the Tech Executive Operating System because it's intended for tech executives like CTOs and VPs of engineering. And it gives them the tools to see how they should be measuring themselves, how they should define the work, how to organize their teams, exactly the kind of stuff we just talked about the objectives, about moving upstream, about creating innovation. And I put all that in a book that I hope will help many, many companies become real innovation centers and create engineering teams that are, what I say, worth their weight in gold. They are really, really making an impact on the team and don't merely take an order what product has asked for this quarter and go off along and do it.
Well, it's a great book. I'll buy it very soon. Thank you, Aviv, for being a guest at the CTO Show. And I hope to speak with you again sooner. And bye.
Thank you, Alex. I had a good time.